Welcome to the Doom Scroll News Report here on Radio Taiwan International, where I, Amanda Stevens, and my co-host,
Hannah Belinsky,
two writers who are political by necessity, cover some of the biggest international news stories dominating our news feeds from the last week. I'm Amanda Stevens, and this week we're tackling, honestly, some bummers, but they're pretty important. The Sudanese civil war, which can now be seen from space, the longest U.S. government shutdown in history, and why that matters, and hopefully one last bit of good news about plastics in the ocean, not a phrase you hear often. So how have you been this week, Hannah? I think it's one of the few weeks in a long time, there's no wood in the studio, so I might regret this, that you and I haven't been sick while recording the podcast.
Oh my God, where is the wood? Please, why would you say this now?
I found some behind me. I'm knocking it quick. If you're not an American, you're supposed to knock on wood to counteract something that if you say something, then the opposite will happen. It's a superstition that everybody says they don't believe in, but do believe in.
What I learned was that touching wood calls the fairies to your side.
I think that's where it's supposed to originate from, is like if you knock on wood or whatever, you kind of, I imagine it's like waking them up or whatever.
Yeah.
So they'll counteract the jinx or whatever. Anyway, that's a story for another time about how I believe most Americans are superstitious. But pretend not to be. So anyway, how are you? You're not sick.
I'm chilling, I guess. It's been a busy week. They keep being busy weeks. I guess that's just kind of how it is.
That's the news, baby. That's the news. So, well, let's get into the topics today because the first two are big stories, and I do want to try and end on some lighter news because of it.
Yes, please.
So the first one's going to be really heavy. I don't usually do this, but with some of our other stories, if you do read into this on your own, I would advise to just like put a content warning on some of this because some of the news coverage is necessarily graphic so that you can understand what's going on. Our first topic today is about Sudan's civil war. Now, this topic came to my attention because one of the most arresting headlines I've ever read came across my feed this last week. It was by The Guardian's Nesrine Malik, and it was, "Blood spilled in Sudan can be seen from space. Nobody can feign ignorance about what's going on."
It sounds hyperbolic, but
it sounds hyperbolic, but
real.
It's actually not. News outlets like NBC and ABC have asked analysts to review photos, and they come back chillingly likely that we are seeing blood and bodies from space. But as for the last part, I think that a lot of people are ignorant about what's going on in Sudan, or at least ignorant to how bad it was, including me, until this last week. So we'll get into as much of an overview as we can for today's show. Before that, Hannah, have you been following what's going on in the Sudanese civil war?
So this has come up from time to time. Mostly I've seen it in the form of calls for humanitarian aid and not really specifics about the conflict. It's just about sending aid to Sudan and accompanied by like images of people suffering.
Yeah.
And I had a vague idea of a conflict taking place there, but not nearly as much information as I would have about, say, the other two conflicts going on right now.
I mean, like, it is. We're going to get into a summary quickly, but something that like really kind of upset me, I think, the most while I was learning about this is that this is a conflict I believe is on par in severity to civilian populations and the number of people who are affected with the other two large conflicts in Palestine and in Ukraine.
And it's been going on for 2 years.
It's been going on for a very long time. So let's just get into it. What's been happening in Sudan for the last 2 years. Much thanks in advance to Natasha Booty and Farouk Chothia at the BBC for their clear and in-depth explainer, which I used for a lot of this. So, in short, the conflict happened shortly after Sudan overthrew its previous leader, President Omar al-Bashir, in a coup. A joint civilian-military government was set up as many people were protesting for democracy, but that was also overthrown in 2021 in another coup staged by two generals, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who is the head of the armed forces and effectively the Sudanese president, and the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF leader, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, a.k.a. Hemeti. The breakdown after this is largely attributed to neither man wanting to lose power and a disagreement about incorporating the RSF into the military. It's unclear about who fired the first shot in the civil war, but active warfare has been a constant since 2023, with Hemeti and the RSF on one side and the Al Burhan and Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, on the other. Since the start of the conflict, the RSF has repeatedly been found to have committed terrible war crimes, ethnic cleansing of the non-Arab population, and scorched earth warfare. More than 150,000 people have died across Sudan, 12 million have fled from their homes, and famine has just been declared by the IPC's Famine Review Committee in the recently captured city of El Fasher, which was taken at the end of October. This city and area in Darfur is also where the satellite imagery has been released, along with videos of RSF forces summarily executing civilians. There are proposals for a ceasefire, but according to multiple sources, neither side seems eager to accept such a proposal. Despite this, interest and attention in the crisis is small, and I disagree with that initial headline that caught my attention, that people can't feign ignorance, because I think ignorance itself is a huge problem here. Hannah, what are some of the reasons you think this conflict hasn't been making headlines as often as similar tragedies in Ukraine or Palestine?
Probably lots of contributing factors. I think up top it should be mentioned that you and I can only read news in English and to a lesser extent in Chinese. So the kind of news we have access to is naturally limited by this fact. So one reason I think is pure media bias. And there's also just only so many news stories a given outlet can realistically report on at a given time. And this is probably getting boxed out on the basis that other conflicts more directly affect Western interests.
Well, if we look at Russia and Ukraine,
right,
a lot of, well, I can say the United States is very concerned with whatever Russia does in any attempts at a power grab, or that could be construed as a power grab.
Yes, because, you know, they're ideological enemies, I guess you could interpret them as such. Whereas Sudan doesn't play, they're not nearly as much of like a global player in these kind of grand schemes.
Or we could say that many Western powers who write the news you and I consume don't see them as a major player.
Yeah, I think so. And possibly another reason is that while there are a lot of European immigrants to the United States, or, you know, people who have European ancestry, like such as myself, I have some Ukrainian ancestry, I think that gives those conflicts a bit more relevance, whereas relatively speaking, there aren't quite so many, you know, African or specifically Sudanese immigrants, just relatively speaking. So I think Sudan feels quite remote. Certainly, I'll admit it feels remote to me. I really don't know much about Sudan. I had to do some reading, and that kind of brings me to my last point, which is that this conflict is complicated and difficult to understand. Whereas with the other wars, it's like, okay, this aggressor wants territory kind of deal. Like, that's very easy to understand.
Well, those, I guess, we've described them as invasions, right? While this one is a civil war, which was something I was going to bring up. But potentially another factor being that this is an internal fight in one country. Again, though, let this be said that this is not us saying why it shouldn't be in the news, but perhaps explainers trying to rationalize, I guess,
trying to understand
why we haven't seen it in the news as much.
And you know what else, too, is it is very shocking, the sheer scale of the suffering that's taking place there. And I think it is so unfathomable to people like you and me who have lived comparatively very cushy lives.
And thank God.
Yes, and that makes it that much harder, I believe, to relate to or to understand what could possibly be motivating a degree of violence that could be seen from outer space. Like, I can't really imagine.
Well, unfortunately, there's not much that we can say can be done about this, but I would end this one segment by saying I think the least we can do when you're faced with terrible news is to keep abreast of it so that it can't be forgotten. I think one of the greatest tragedies of this conflict is the fact that most people don't know, or at least don't know the depth of the suffering that's happening. And I often like to look at it as like my duty to at least be aware of what's happening so that I can tell other people. And hopefully that by spreading awareness, like we've said with other conflicts, you might move people to action, and you might move enough people to action that things can change.
Be high information. Don't be low information.
Yeah. So as for the next topic, Last Tuesday, the U.S. Senate failed to fund the government, which means that on Wednesday, November 5th, the ongoing U.S. government shutdown became the longest in history, with no end in sight, unfortunately. Now, we've covered in previous shows why the government shutdown is happening, so today we're going to be focusing on the effects of keeping the government shut down so far to kind of give an idea of what that even looks like, because government shutdowns themselves are a uniquely American problem. It doesn't happen in any other country. So, with the government not funded, many services are temporarily closed, such as national parks and museums and nationally funded preschools. Meanwhile, other government workers have been furloughed or are working without pay, which includes air traffic controllers, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, and all in-hospital medical care workers. U.S. troops were also supposed to be unpaid, but the administration managed to find emergency funds to pay the military, although this is not a long-term solution and may not even be a two-time solution. And the White House has suggested that it will at least try to not pay back many furloughed workers once the government reopens, which has been customary, I guess, up until now.
Yeah, seriously. What do you even say? I just saw yesterday that they are going to cut thousands of domestic flights through some of the United States' busiest airports.
10% of air traffic.
Shutdown. That's right, which amounts to 3,500 to 4,000 flights per day.
Yeah, it's not looking good for the end of the year travel or holiday travel.
Exactly. It's just bad. It's bad.
It's no good. Now, one of the biggest areas that the government shutdown has affected Americans is in SNAP benefits. And that is the name of the government subsidy program that gives money to low and no income families so that they can afford to buy food. These benefits are handed out on a monthly basis. And on November 1st, there were no SNAP benefits sent out. And while judges have ordered the administration to find a way to pay for them, and the administration has said that it will find a way to pay for them and has even found money that it says it will use to pay for them, there is still uncertainty regarding how much money and when those benefits will arrive. And there is no nationwide plan in place in the meantime to help American families who cannot afford to buy food while they wait. Meanwhile, some reports are trickling in that House Republicans aren't even showing up to work during the shutdown. And the Speaker refuses to inaugurate an elected Congresswoman, which should still be allowed during a shutdown. And there are even photos of the White House being decked out in more golden gilding, which I do think are exaggerated, but it is not exaggerated that it seems that the president is more intent on White House renovations than he is on ending the shutdown.
What is this? What is it with this guy in gold? I don't get it.
I did check the gilding accusations on Snopes before I wrote that in, and you can look at side-by-side photos of after he's arrived in the White House, how much golden gilding has been added to the White House since.
What is that about?
Some people say it's the Mar-a-Lagoing, or to make it look more like Mar-a-Lago. But anyway,
tacky.
All in all, it feels like a real let them eat cake moment.
It really does.
As Americans are starving. And anyway, to bring it back, the last government shutdown came to a close after air traffic controllers started calling out sick en masse, which has already started happening.
Yeah.
But do you think that those same pressures will be enough to bring this shutdown to a close? And if not, what do you think it will take?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When I first brought up the topic of the government shutdown on the program, it was a few weeks back when it just happened.
You didn't think we'd still be talking about it, did you?
I didn't think it was going to drag on for this long, but here we are. He has broken his record from his first term. And I'm really kind of bewildered because it feels like the GOP is basically shooting themselves in the foot with this. Whereas before, okay, what should I say?
How to stay on track on this. There's so much to say.
In the beginning, when it had just shut down, obviously it had the most immediate effect on federal workers. We talked a little bit about how, sometimes people may not even notice that the government has shut down because maybe it doesn't impact
if you
them.
don't work for the government,
right?
If you're not receiving government benefits immediately.
Right. But they've let it go on long enough that now, these people who depend on certain government programs are not getting those benefits. And I guess the thing I fear is neither Republicans nor Democrats really care about these little guys because, realistically, these are probably single moms and the most disadvantaged groups out there who are now basically having to crowdfund for grocery money so they don't starve.
I would say on that point, the New York Times put out a very good podcast episode you can listen to where they went and talked to one of the most dependent districts in the United States on SNAP benefits. Like just, I think, a few days ago about what life looks like for them. And you already have people who are saying they have to choose between buying their medication or buying food. And people who say, like, they're going hungry to make sure that the food they get from charity is able to feed their children.
Yeah.
Like, that's already happening.
Yep.
And this is day 35 of a government shutdown where we don't see, like, a lot of mobilization to try to find a compromise.
That's the thing.
And also the congressmen are still being paid.
Yeah, that's really the kicker. But,
anyway,
you were saying it does feel like they're not even actually like debating with each other about any solutions. It's like everybody has checked out. So I guess it's just going to be a waiting game. I guess until these elites, these political elites, decide that the costs of staying shut down outweigh their policy goals, I guess it will just stay shut down.
Now, we may see some movement on that because just before recording the election season in the United States, there's always an election season going on. The election season in the United States wrapped up, and the Republican Party, which is receiving more and more blame for the shutdown as it drags on, did lose quite large, although it's not the biggest election. So perhaps we'll see some movement in the coming days. I can hope. There are also rumors that a bipartisan movement to try and figure something out before Thanksgiving has been growing.
I do get the feeling that the GOP is facing some internal turmoil. But yeah, I really don't know. I really can't say. I really expected it to be over by now, and it is not.
I mean, I guess we could just end with there's really no good excuse to just let people go hungry when you could fix that.
Exactly.
All right, so for our last story today, I need a little bit of a palate cleanser because reading about the first two honestly kind of ruined my week. They were so heavy.
It's a bummer.
I was going to end, we were talking about climate, and I got served another news story this week. It is a research paper released by King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, or KAUST, which is what I'll be calling it for the rest of this, which announced early this week that plastic-eating bacteria have been found in the oceans, plural, because they were found in 80% of the tested areas, including plastic-heavy deposits and as deep down as 2 kilometers. These plastic-eating bacteria had developed an enzyme called PETase, which allows it to digest PET plastics, which are most commonly found in clothes and plastic bottles. So it's kind of like lactase, but for PET plastic, which is literally what it is. That's kind of how I had to rationalize it to myself.
Pet-tase.
Yeah, pet-tase, pet-tase, I don't know. They also discovered a genetic marker that allows them to see which bacteria have this enzyme and when it's active, or when they're using it. So after hearing last week's news about missing the 1.5 Celsius marker, this news made me find some more hope again. But before I finish up, I think you heard about this news through me, Hannah. So how did it hit you?
I actually I've been aware of this since it was discovered. It was quite a while back now. I think it was almost 10 years ago. But you're including this topic has inspired me to include, maybe next week, some information about a bit of news I just read about a few days ago about mushroom-powered computers. But to stay on topic, that's
okay. But that's for next week. So stay tuned. That's a little teaser for you guys.
Yes,
and me.
Of course, I think it's never going to be as simple as releasing a bunch of these bacteria into the environment and just letting them have at it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's very possible that they stand to revolutionize plastics recycling within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
I think it is in the pipeline for real.
So like last week, and like you just said, this is sort of a mixed news announcement because the paper makes it clear that we should not look at this as a get out of pollution free card.
Nothing is that. Nothing is that simple.
Because the bacteria work extremely slowly. So they're not capable of cleaning up our oceans for us. But this did lead me to learn we're a little too effective. Or ineffective? I don't know.
Yeah.
This did lead me to learning about the technology and the development for land-based bacteria and even fungi, which has been going on since 2016 when they first discovered a land-based bacteria which could break down plastics. There have been several big breakthroughs in 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2020, where we discovered several different varieties of plastic-eating bacteria and fungi, and a UK experiment which made it possible for them to work faster, basically. The goal of all this research is, like you said, to eventually create plastic recycling centers that can fully recycle plastic, unlike now where we're only able to recycle it into lower quality goods that can't be recycled a second time, usually into things like carpets. Although that is still a way off, this work is good news because it allows us to find a more biodiverse version of these things, as well as to find other things through this biogenetic marker that can use this enzyme. So it's definitely hope for the future, especially as more studies come out about just how many microplastics there are around us,
and in us. Unfortunately.
In the meantime, it's a lot more efficient to just try and cut down on plastic in our daily lives. So similar to what you did last week, Hannah, I'm going to ask you, in what ways have you and your family been reducing plastic use? I assume it's partially on your mind knowing what we both doom scroll and because you have a little baby.
Naturally. I'm also Taiwanese through my mother's side, so I come from a long lineage of people reappropriating plastic containers.
Now,
and
hold on,
bags.
because I come from a long lineage of white people reusing
the
plastic bags from the grocery store.
I have always thought of this as like an Asian thing. I don't know
Don't
why.
you have the bag of bags?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, we have the bag of bags. That was
Okay.
always on like the back of our like pantry door.
Okay, so blue staters, they're still doing this. That's very heartening because I've always thought of this as like a Asian thing, a Southeast Asian thing.
I think it's just a frugal thing.
Yeah, maybe. It's
a frugal thing. It's a frugal
probably
thing.
Is. So
We're telling on ourselves.
Well, not to toot my own horn, but I think I am really good at this because it just comes naturally to me, either to avoid buying a plastic container in the first place or to reuse the one I have on hand. For example, I've been using the same laundry detergent container for literally years now, and I know because they have changed the packaging design since I bought it. And at this rate, I will probably will it down to my son. Another thing I do is I never buy soap in the plastic containers like the pump bottles or whatever. I only buy bar soaps because you can, you could use the whole thing and then nothing is left behind.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a pretty long way to decluttering plastic from your home because that's a daily necessity. I'm also a Ziploc bag washer and reuser. I'm one of those freaks. Unless I used it to store raw meat or fish, then
Of course. There's a safety hazard thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And while this is not plastics related necessarily, I do think one of the best things I've done to reduce paper waste in my house is implementing cloth napkins, which I then wash on a weekly basis. I'm telling you, I'm full of tricks. And once you have a system in place, that's really the key. You have to have a system in place. It's easy to avoid buying more plastic or paper or other single-use or disposable items simply because you don't want to deal with the waste.
Yeah.
So my biggest tips are always buy the refill. Don't buy a new container. Buy bar soaps, bar shampoos. I think those exist too.
Yeah.
Don't buy the big, stupid plastic bottle every time. And just overall, limit what you buy to only what you really need, what you really use.
That's like what we said last time.
Exactly.
Like, the biggest win is to try to be as low consumerism as you possibly can.
That's right. So the overall gist of the episode is be high information and be
low consumption. And you know what? That's it. That's all for today's news report. A quick reminder, you can find all of our referenced articles in the show notes for today's episode. I'm Amanda Stevens.
And I'm Hannah Belinsky.
And thanks for joining us on air today. Tune in tomorrow for more programs by Radio Taiwan International. And in the meantime, remember to stop scrolling, touch grass, be high information, and low consumption. And we'll see you next week. You're listening to Radio Taiwan International.